Welcome to the award-winning Women in Healthcare Leadership podcast series brought to you by Medscape Education. Our mission is to educate, advocate, and inspire women in healthcare to lift as they rise. Each episode brings you voices of leaders who are breaking barriers and leading the way in advancing women's health. Join our global community of listeners as we hear from her. Ready to be part of the movement? Let's dive in.
Hello and welcome to Medscape's Women in Healthcare Leadership Series. I'm Camille Scott-Smith, Senior Director at Medscape Education. Joining me today is someone truly special, Lobna Salem, Chief Medical Officer at Viatris, a global healthcare company. As a senior executive with more than 30 years of expertise in the biopharmaceutical industry, Lobna has worked across different cultures and geographies in a variety of global, regional, and country level roles. Welcome, Lobna.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure indeed. In this episode, we will also hear from someone equally special, Dr. Amrit Ray. Amrit is an internationally recognized senior pharmaceutical executive and physician researcher. Today, he is a full-time board chairman and director across a portfolio of global life sciences companies. With 3 decades of healthcare experience, Amrit previously held prominent executive roles including global president, head of R&D, and executive team member at Pfizer Upjohn. Amrit is also renowned as a strong people developer and sought-after mentor, having built successful teams and mentored future leaders. Amrit and Lobna were colleagues at Pfizer, and throughout this episode, Amrit will provide his perspective on female leadership in healthcare and the role he has played in mentoring such leaders. So let's get started. So Lobna, the first question I want to ask you is, can you comment on what prompted you to embark on a career in the field of healthcare?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. And actually, I embarked on that career from a very, I would say, unconventional angle. So during my childhood, I actually loved to act. I wanted to be an actress. So I would go on, I actually did some kind of, I would say, semi-professional acting. So I loved English literature. So I would do, plays like, Julius Caesar. I was Antony in Julius Caesar. I did Dodger in Oliver Twist. So actually that was my passion so totally separate from healthcare, right? Something totally different. And then, my family said, you know what, this is a hobby, Lobna, more than, a profession. I come from the Middle East. I come from Egypt. So it's like, this is great to have it, to learn drama is great, but you need to do something, right? Versus like having this hobby. So, my parents kind of sat with me and say, what's really the fundamental purpose of why do you like to act? And it was a very good question, actually changed my kind of career trajectory in a way. And I said, I'd like to make a difference in people's lives. I want to make them happy. I want to delve into a person's world where I understand his fears, his vulnerabilities, his desires. Of course, it was not that grandiose speaking when I was little, but that kind of was my intention. I really want to make people happy, make a difference in their life. So my parents said, you know what? Doctors do that as well. You would never think that I got into science from that angle, but that's really how I got into science, from making a difference, or wanting to make a difference in people's life. So it's two expressions, as you say, of the same purpose, to connect, to heal, and to leave people pretty much better than when you found them.
Thank you so much for sharing that. My son is actually training to be an actor, but I don't think I can convince him to take up the medical route. We will now hear from Amrit on his first impression of meeting Lobna and the leadership qualities he saw in her.
For some perspective, I've had the opportunity to meet and work with many leaders from different companies, different geographies, and leaders in different roles. So I have some calibration and some benchmark. And if I step back and apply that, was very interesting in the first few interactions with Lobna. She stood out, and she stood out in a few distinct ways. I felt that first, what struck me was that in conversation with her, she would always refer more to the we and to other people. There was very little reference to I. So, very little I did this, I did that, and much more we did this, or she did that, or he did that. And I found that very, very interesting that she came across as someone who always put the team first, someone who amplified collective work and like to speak about others' accomplishments. I found that to be distinctive. And in many ways, I reflected if I took a team of 100 people and asked Lobna to lead that team, her effect on that team would make it equivalent to 200 people just by adding one person because she was effective as a leader. And I thought that was very impressive and also quite interesting. Not all leaders do that. A second thing that I also found interesting in speaking with Lobna was her level of courage. It was a quiet courage, but a very distinct and very deliberate courage that came across when I could see that she was not afraid of the hard questions. So sometimes, for example, we would look at a business opportunity or a scientific opportunity, and you can question the technical aspects and you can go through all of the detail of whether that represents a good opportunity. But at the end of all of that, you come to some of the harder questions that might be, for example, as we are in healthcare and patients are our focus, the questions may be, yes, I know this is a good opportunity, but is it the right thing to do? Is it the right thing to do for patients? Is it the right thing to do for public health? Now, when some leaders are faced with those questions, they can find them uncomfortable. Now, in Lobna's case, what I found was that she embraced the discomfort. She was very happy to take on those difficult questions and sometimes give courageous answers that weren't what we expected if we purely looked at them from a business perspective. And I found that that was a very powerful quality, her ability to take not just the intellectual, but the moral and ethical questions and factor those into her decision making. So she had this combination of not just IQ, but EQ in terms of how would that make a patient feel. And also, if we can coin a term, DQ, a decency quotient. Is it decent and is it the right thing to do? And I found that very, very positive in my first few interactions. It remains today as she has remained consistent in that.
I've been very impressed with your career to date, culminating in your current role as CMO of Viatris. Were there any challenges you faced along the way, and did you have a mentor or mentors that supported you in your journey?
Definitely. I mean, I don't think any career, is without challenges or being successful in career. It actually, I always say success is a byproduct of failure or, opportunity to learn. So definitely, let's start from, I was a practicing physician, and I worked in the National Cancer Institute in Egypt, actually. And then I moved to, in the same institution, I moved to be a sales rep, a medical rep. So I think that for me was a very humbling experience. It was very challenging. It was a huge learning curve. The other challenges, I think, inherently in a female in general. I mean, from a female perspective, you tend to be you want to create a family. You're kind of also have to kind of juggle between work, and at that time we're talking almost 30 years ago, right? Things were quite different from now. So as a female, you want to prove yourself. You want to make sure you deserve a seat at the table. You fit into a structure, you in a kind of a mold that you want to make sure that you're even work longer than a male, you work harder than a male. So it's actually a lot of challenges inherent and only be just about because you're a female, right? Another challenge that came is that moving from Egypt to the United States. after I arrived in the United States and I was successful for a couple of years, that was actually part of the role of mentorship. I moved to development, and this is where it's another humbling experience because when I spent a couple of years in the United States and kind of went through up the ranks to be very pretty senior in the medical affairs world, some of my mentors told me is that you really don't have a development experience, so you need to move to development. At that time in my career where I was really settling in, I had a team, I had already kind of like made my name in medical affairs. All of a sudden, I need then to move to have more of a lateral move into development. That really kind of made me feel very vulnerable. I had great mentors that really didn't allow me to settle, didn't allow me to sit much in my comfort zone and said, you know what, look at your career, Lobna, as a tapestry of skills. Like, look at your career. What do you have, and what are you missing? So I think that part of my skill set was missing. I think the development experience. So I spent many years in development, and then I had kind of the full scale of, the what I would say now, what prompted me now to be, or what qualified me now to be a chief medical officer.
You've talked about these mentors that you've had along the way. I'm curious to understand from you what aspects of the leadership style of some of those mentors you have taken into your own style of leadership.
I was fortunate enough to have mentors who, kind of, I would say, didn't just give me answers, but they asked me very good questions. What stayed with me isn't just what they said, but how they led. The best ones, they led both with their head and their heart. They were very decisive when needed, but also deeply human. They listened, but they also asked good questions. They gave also people space to grow. They actually led with more with kindness, with clarity, and that really shaped how I lead today. Being transparent, they were very honest, and they also bringing people together on the journey, rather than them leading from above. One of the things I learned also from them, or also I hope I learned from them, is the humility, the ability to say, you know what, I don't know, but let's figure this out together. And I think this created a psychological safety for the teams. And I think this is something that I'm hoping I'm able to kind of give to my teams and the colleagues that I mentor as well.
Thank you. And I'm sure our listeners will find those sentiments that you've just shared really helpful, really insightful, and really valuable. Here, Amrit talks about his experience of working with Lobna and the support he's provided to female leaders in their careers.
I have had the privilege of working with Lobna over a number of years and seeing not so much a role perspective, but seeing a long term career perspective. And when I think about mentorship, I sometimes look at the analogy of candles and mirrors. There are some people who generate great light, and sometimes our role as leaders can be most effective if we try and reflect that. And just to be clear here, Lobna was a candle generating the light. Lobna was certainly very effective in what she was doing. And my role as a mentor, more often than not, was to reflect that, amplify that, make sure that she was recognized for her work. And sometimes that is not difficult when there's a very bright light, as in the case of Lobna. I also think that in terms of careers and mentors, it's sometimes healthy to take a long term view and to look at it in terms of career impact rather than impact in a particular job at a particular moment. And I've appreciated being able to step back with Lobna and other leaders and trying to take a career view. What is your total career impact? And that's often what I focus on more as a mentor.
I also wanted to get your perspective on cultural differences that exist. You mentioned earlier that you're from Egypt. Can you comment on how the path of aspiring female leaders from Africa and the Middle East might be different to that of their counterparts from the West, if at all?
A very interesting question, actually, Camille, because there's often a stereotype that women in Egypt have fewer opportunities or less voice compared to the West, or rather in the Middle East, so that part of the world in general. But having lived there for a very long time and grew up there, that's not really the full picture. I mean, I've seen empowerment that's very unique actually, and it's very real. Like for example, it's you have you see parts of the Middle East today. Women are leading ministries, running hospitals, shaping science, policy, uh, doing that while balancing deep culture and family values. Uh, what makes it very powerful, that part of the world, it's earned through resilience. And I've seen when I moved to the United States, so it's a little bit different. The systems help you to carve a way for you in order to thrive. Something that, so it's kind of more system related. Definitely talent has a great role in the West as well, but the system helps you. So the element of it's more through strength through, or you succeed through the system empowering you and giving you this room to grow in the West, versus in the Middle East, it's more of you make it work. Through your resilience, you make it work. But at the end of the day, you find very two successful females, one in from the Middle East, or one from the East, and one from the West, and both of them are very talented. But the path to kind of success is a little bit different between both.
Thank you, Lobna. Fascinating listening to that. And I'm sure many of our listeners, again, will identify with much of what you've shared there. Um, when we first spoke, going back a few months now, you mentioned, and you talked about it earlier as well, that it's important for female leaders to have the right support system for a healthy work life balance. Did you have such a support system, and how did this help your career progression?
In order to be successful, everybody needs to have a support system. That's very important. In Egypt and pretty much of the Middle East, support tends to be deeply personal. It's community based. Family is the core safety net. Parents, siblings, friends, even colleagues step in to help you juggle work, travel, and motherhood. That's kind of the collective spirit of the support system. They celebrate your success as a kind of a shared win. Um, of course, the challenge though is that sometimes the closeness can sometimes come with expectations or traditional boundaries that you learn to navigate. In the West, going back to kind of the difference, the support is more structured. Support comes through institutional mechanisms. You have maternity policies, you have mentorship programs, you have leadership development tracks. There's greater formal equality, but less of an emotional and organic network. So, and we take that for granted, right? Sometimes in the Middle East, that have this kind of like emotional support. But every support system, while it's vital for success, it also has its kind of, you have to navigate through it carefully to make sure you benefit from it.
Thank you. Very, very insightful. Thanks for sharing that. Again, going back to one of our previous conversations, and you've touched on it multiple times today, you talked about two important attributes that you believe leaders should have: empathy and not being afraid to show vulnerability. Can you elaborate on this and share any observations on how these attributes might be reflected differently in male and female leaders? Again, if that is indeed the case.
Let's talk about empathy. It's kind of, you see beyond the role, like you just see the person beyond the role, right? Understanding what motivates what's the mate motivates the team or the person, what challenges they face, what creates a space where they are able to feel heard. um, Vulnerability, I would say, is about, I would say it's about honesty. It's like, I've been there, done that. It's the courage to say, I don't have all the answers. I have my own insecurities. And I think, I see the best leaders are the ones that are able to identify their own insecurities and be able to kind of like, not kind of like, give into it. So I think, so this is very important, both from an empathy and vulnerability perspective. And again, as you said, both of them, either men or women, both of them express, both very differently. Like female leaders, for example, they because we are shaped by how we navigated our path, we tend to be more relationship. You have empathy. We connect emotionally. We bring people along. Male leaders, on the other hand, they show empathy through protection. through action, wanting to solve and safeguard. Both are very valuable, but just expressed through very different energies. Um, and what's exciting is both of them are evolving. I mean, you see that the most effective leaders, whether male or female, are those who can integrate both, right? Strength and softness, decisiveness and compassionate, and being also, this is actually what creates the culture that really people would like to belong to, and also they feel they belong, they feel they can relate, and also they can really grow and thrive.
Amrit will now provide his thoughts on the importance of empathy and showing vulnerability in leadership.
Vulnerability is sometimes described as a weakness. I would disagree with that, and I would rather frame vulnerability and the ability to have empathy with others as a great strength. It sometimes takes vulnerability to understand the true impact of our work. And I found that in discussions with Lobna, she had an ability to be vulnerable and to be authentic in being vulnerable. And I can give you an example. When you work with a team, people will go in with their own viewpoints, their own ideas, their own arguments, and they will, of course, try to end up with their ideas coming to the front and winning. Okay, that's a very natural instinct. But if you're vulnerable, and I would see this often with Lobna, she, of course, had her own ideas and own viewpoints, but her goal was never that her ideas would win. There was no winning unless the team won. So what I found with Lobna was that her goal was that we collectively are right. And it doesn't matter what happens to my ideas, whether they're right or wrong. And that vulnerability of allowing my ideas to potentially die, allowing others to come first, I found to be a very powerful trait.
I now want to ask you about what does the future hold for female leaders? How can we ensure that the next generation of female leaders and women aspiring to be leaders receive the support and resources so that they do not walk alone?
I like that. Do not walk alone. So I'm actually very optimistic about the future of female leadership. I mean, having walked that journey for 30 years now, I think we're already seeing a shift. Women having not to fit into an existing structure. It's like this is how it is, and I need to fit. Actually, now women are reshaping what leadership looks like. It's more inclusive, more human, more purpose driven. But of course, we still have work to do. The next generation, as you rightly said, should not kind of have to walk the same uphill path. They should start from a place where there's representation, respect, resources already embedded. And we need to be intentional about it. We need to create mentorship pipelines, sponsorship programs, flexible work environments, cultures where empathy isn't seen as a weakness, but a strength. Also, vulnerability is not seen as a weakness, but a strength, as we mentioned. Also, I believe us women who have walked the path uh, we have to reach back and lift others. It's not we have to be visible, to tell our stories, to normalize ambition, to normalize courage, to normalize very important and coming from vulnerability, to really normalize imperfection. I think the kind of the image of a leader that should be like macho, having everything right, all buttoned down, everything should be like no. This is really people don't relate to that type of leaders, and I think specifically for females, we have to tell our stories and how we, as we said, normalize imperfection and vulnerability. Again, if we're able to build systems that can combine opportunity and humanity, then the next generation of women won't walk alone. They will walk together, either further, faster, and carrying other women forward.
Lovely. Beautiful to hear that. And I particularly like what you've just said, as a moment earlier, that female leaders should lift other women as they rise. That is exactly what this podcast series is about. Amrit will now provide his perspective on his learnings from mentoring female leaders and the impact it's had on his own leadership style.
I have found that there are many opportunities for us to learn together. And some of these lessons apply to all leaders, including female leaders. But a few things have stood out to me as I reflect on some of those most effective leaders. The first is, and perhaps a suggestion, a word of advice I would offer, which is have high aspirations, aim high, and aim sometimes for excellence without forcing yourself to have perfection. I think that allows a lot more progress, and that applies in the business environment, in the corporate environment, in many other environments where that commitment to excellence is what comes first, and a little bit of forgiveness on some of the perfection aspects that can hold back progress. I think a second that I have often reflected on is the importance of being vocal. I like how, in some forums, it is important to see people asking to be at the table. Ask if you can be involved. Ask if you can contribute. Another way, though, that the importance of being vocal comes across is the importance of broadcasting and celebrating victories. We often step back and see many, many opportunities where organizations succeed. And if you're the person who is out calling out, celebrating, enthusiastically giving praise to the victories of others, that lifts everyone up. That doesn't diminish your own accomplishments in any way. If anything, that lifts the tide for everyone. Last but not least, I think that right from the start of careers all the way through to the end, which is to be very deliberate and intentional about building a professional network. And that means building a network of people who will sometimes be there to support, sometimes be there to mentor, but also be there to disagree at times and saying that I think you may be making a mistake. And the importance of building a network that is long term and sustaining is that if mentors have known you over a period of time, they can step back and look at broader character, look at broader career, and be able to make a better judgment on whether this step may be in your best interests or not. So keep up the dialogues with your professional network, even if there isn't an immediate question. Keep them posted, keep them engaged, and keep the relationship alive.
Lubna, we've come to the final question, and it's one about your legacy. So, the singer Tina Turner once said, "My legacy is that I stayed on course from the beginning to the end." What would you like your legacy to be?
My legacy would be about impact with integrity, never losing sight of my purpose, which always have been to make a real difference in people's life. Um, I think, I hope people will say that I led them with empathy and courage. I created a space for them to grow, and that I led them, as I said, with the head and the heart, with authenticity. Um, I also want people to remember me as a leader that was strong but kind, ambitious but compassionate, also driven but also deeply human. And I think this is while doing all this, while staying anchored in my purpose. And one of the things that keep me going for 30 years and hopefully more is that I am so anchored in my purpose. I'd like that people would remember me, as I said, that if one thing, with kindness and compassion and strength and resilience. I think this is, I know it's long, but I think that's what I would like my legacy to be.
Well, that's very profound. Lobna, thank you for your time today.
It was a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you.
Thanks also to our listeners. And join us again for the next episode of the Hear From Her podcast series.
To our listeners around the world, thanks for joining us today. Tune in as we continue our journey to amplify the voices of women leaders in healthcare. Hear From Her is brought to you by Medscape Education. Please subscribe to Hear From Her on your preferred podcast channel and follow us on LinkedIn. Until next time, remember to lift as you rise.